everybody. All right, I asked on Instagram and you guys said yes, that you would like to see some book reviews. So I'm going to start to do some more book reviews. I have a couple here on my channel, but not a ton. So these are going to be basically books that have to do with this channel and also the Goddess Life podcast. So magical books, books for soul growth, books on like shadow work, books on goddesses, self-help, like spiritual kind of books, holistic healing, all those kinds of fun topics. I will occasionally do some reviews on books for you guys. Also, let me know in the comments too if you guys want me to do some more deck reviews. I have a couple deck review videos here as well. But I have a lot of decks that I haven't really talked about, and I'd be more than willing to do like a deck review also. So let me know in the comments if you would like that. All right, so the first two books that we are going to be talking about today, well, these are the only books we're talking about today. So the two books we're talking about today are from Doughty, and we have Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory, and we have From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death. So I got both of these books from my local library, and I love them, so I will be purchasing them on Amazon to have copies for myself and to let others borrow, because I think everybody needs to read these two books. Okay, so both of these books, they definitely have to do with death. Death and dying and that whole process, but they're also pretty different books as well. So we'll go into Smoke Gets in Your Eyes first, and then we'll talk about... This glare is ridiculous. And we'll talk about From Here to Eternity. And I'm going to try to make these quick, just because that's how I like to do my videos. I don't like to make really long videos. All right, so Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory. This book is fabulous. So this book is more of like a memoir, kind of autobiography, sort of her time, of Caitlin's time working in a crematory. So Caitlin Doughty, she is the owner of Undertaking LA, which is kind of like an alternative funeral home out in LA, obviously. And they specialize in like natural burials and all of that good stuff, which is so amazing. Oh, and Caitlin Doughty, she is Ask a Mortician here on YouTube. I'm obsessed with her freaking channel. I just love her. Total fangirl. But she's really good. She makes death not, because death isn't, it's a very sad thing, but it's not, it doesn't have to be scary. Death doesn't have to be scary. It's a part of life. Just like birth is a part of life, death is a part of life, and it doesn't need to be scary and traumatizing. Of course, there are some more, well, we'll talk about this here. But, you know, I mean, death, yeah, there are some traumatizing deaths, but it doesn't need to be this, like, shut it away in the shadows and let's not discuss it and let's ignore it type thing. You know, death is all around us. We all are going to die. And actually, that's how Caitlin ends a lot of her videos is. And remember, you too will die. But it's true. I mean, some people may think that's morbid, but it's a fact of life. And I just love how Caitlin brings these topics to light. And she does it in a way that's just really relatable and down to earth and not like super macabre, even though some of the things she talks about are a little more macabre. But definitely check out her channel, Ask a Mortician. Anyway, so this book is when she first started in her, I believe it was her early 20s. She started working at a crematory in California, and she was the person who would prepare the bodies and then put them into the cremation machine. She would also go with one of their pickup guys who would go pick up bodies of people who died at home and stuff. So she definitely got a lot of firsthand hands-on experience dealing with death and bodies and decay, and she does go into detail in this. So this book is not, if you're like looking for something, a book that like tiptoes around the death and dying process and tiptoes around the you know, the cremation process and what goes on in a funeral home, this book is not for you. But I think it is for you. I think everybody should read this. She definitely goes into some detail about things, like she talks about some mold growing on one of the bodies because it had been dead for a while and wasn't refrigerated properly, and so there was mold growing on the body. So she does go into detail, but it's not like ridiculously excessive, super gory detail. It's just matter-of-fact, realistic detail. So It's really good. This was really eye-opening too, as far as embalming and the cremation process. Like, I didn't know that families are allowed to be part of the cremation process. You can actually, it's a family witness cremation, and the family can go into the crematory, and even a family member can push the button to start the machine up. It's called a retort, to start the machine. And I think that's really awesome to be part of. It's almost ritualistic to be part of that that moment, that cremation, because we kind of lose that at the when we have cremation versus like a in-ground burial. You know, we go to the cemetery and we watch the casket being lowered, or you know, there's that moment at the cemetery. You don't really get that so much all the time with the cremation process. So I really like that families can be part of that. So Caitlin definitely is, she's shaking up the funeral industry. So she definitely has her point of view. Because I was reading some reviews on this book, and people were like kind of annoyed with her point of view and how that kind of set the tone for this book. And it's like, well, this is like her memoir. Of course it's going to have her views and her tone and what she thinks of things. Basically, she's not a big fan of like the current modern funeral industry. You know, she thinks that death should be brought back to the families, which I think it should as well. It should be more, the whole death and dying and funeral process the families should be a lot more involved with it than what they are. That has been completely removed. I cannot talk right now. Removed from families here in the Western civilization. It's like death is no longer part of our way of life. When just, you know, even 100 years ago, which really isn't that long ago, when a family member died, it was up to the family to take care of the body, to wash the body, to shroud the body. You know, it wasn't this such removed thing. And now death has been so removed from us, and it really impacts our grieving process, which she goes into in here. You know, it really, when death is so removed from our vision and from our scope of things, and when we are not involved heavily in the funeral preparation and the burial and the body and everything, it really kind of separates the death from our mind. Which some people may be like, well, that's great. I don't want to think about death. And because grief sucks. It does. But it is a healthy part of dealing with death. And it is something that we're starting to have like really removed from our lives here in Western civilization. And I think it's really, it's a sad thing. But so she talks about that a lot in here. She's not a fan of like embalming. A lot of the modern day funeral practices she's not a fan of, and I actually really 100% agree with her. I've learned so much. I've learned you don't legally need to have your family member embalmed. Like, what? I thought that you had to have a family member embalmed. Nope, you don't have to at all. So you'll definitely learn a lot of things in this book. I think it was really, I also learned how embalming is done. And I'm sure a lot of us too have kind of this idea of, oh, it's just this simple, you know, maybe they put a little cut here in the throat and drain the blood and then they replace it with the fluids. And no, it's like she goes into the description of embalming, and I don't want this done to any of my family members. And I'm putting it in my advance directive that I do not want to be embalmed under any circumstances. Anyway, this was a really big, I'm talking a lot. But this is a really good book. It's really eye-opening. As far as the funeral industry, what really goes on behind the scenes at a funeral home, and the whole burial process and the whole funeral process. It's very eye-opening, and I really, really think that everybody should read this book. All right, and then we have From Here to Eternity. This is her newest book, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death. I loved this book. I've always been really interested in other cultures and how other people do things and the symbolism behind why people do the things that they do. And I just think it's really beautiful how people all around the world have their own customs and their own ways of doing things. And death is no different. Every culture and people around the world have their own customs and their own beliefs. And even though sometimes it may look drastically different than what we are used to in our own, culture, they all have their reasons. So even there are some, she travels to different parts of the world here. So each chapter is like a different, she goes into like the death and dying industry and stuff here in the U.S. But yeah, she travels the world. So like Indonesia, there's also a couple places here in the United States. There's Colorado and a place in California and North Carolina. But she goes into the death culture in Spain, Japan, Mexico, Indonesia, Bolivia. Um, anyway, the point is, some of the cultures that you will read about, you're like, holy crap, like when you first hear about it or even see it, because some of these I've seen on like documentaries and stuff, it can be jarring or it can be a little shocking. Like, what the hell? Because a lot of other cultures put death like right, like they live with death. And a lot of it may be like, what the heck is going on to us Westerners when we first see it? But she goes into the actual meaning behind why some of these cultures do the things that they do and their customs and why they have those customs. And it's actually really, really beautiful. So many cultures around the world, even if it's completely different than what we're used to, there's so much meaning and love and like purpose behind what they do, even if it looks extreme or kind of crazy. It's really kind of awesome. And it's just really eye-opening to see all of the different death customs. And then there's also a couple countries here where it's almost death is even more removed for them than it is here. Like I want to say it was Spain. At their funeral homes, there are some things that were great about Spain, which she mentioned in the book, like in Barcelona and what am I trying to say? In Barcelona, you can go to the funeral home and you can have all day long with the body in the funeral home, which is really nice because here in the United States, you usually don't get that. You usually get you get to rent the room for like 2 hours for family and friends to come and pay their respects to the family and to the deceased. But then that's really kind of it. You don't get much more time. But in Barcelona, you can have all day long to sit in the room, but they have the body placed behind like plexiglass, so you can't get too close to death. So you can sit there with your loved one for hours and hours, but you can't get too close to your loved one. So that was kind of interesting. And then there's other countries where, it's in Indonesia where I'm pretty sure, because I read this book a little while ago and now I don't want to like misquote, but I'm pretty sure it's Indonesia where they actually exhume their loved ones and clean them off because they get kind of like mummified after they bury them. And years later, they'll exhume them, their loved ones, and they dust them off and kind of clean them up, and they'll change their clothes. And that sounds kind of crazy. You're probably like, what? Like, if you're not used to that, like, why would you unbury your grandma and, like, dust her off and change her clothes and stuff? But it's a very loving act for them. It's not like some weird, like, oh, let's dig up grandma. It's like a very loving act. And I don't want to give away too much, so I'm not going to go into too much more detail. But it's just really, really a cool book. These books are easy reads, too, so they're not going to take you very long. And if you're a fan of Caitlin's videos, more than likely you've probably already read these books. But if you haven't and you're a fan of her videos, you're going to love her books because she writes just like how she talks. But yeah, it's just really interesting to just see or read about how everybody around the world has their own beliefs and customs surrounding death. And it's actually really, really beautiful. And then it's kind of crazy, too, the laws that we have here in the United States. It's ridiculous. Like she talks about in Colorado, it's Keystone, Colorado. It's the only legal open-air funeral pyre in the United States. And the people to get this going out there in Keystone, like, they had to jump through hoops, like crazy legal things to get this open-air funeral pyre. And it's kind of like, that's ridiculous. Like, why can't, if you have a large expanse of land, like, why can't we just cremate our loved ones out there on a funeral pyre, like out in nature? Why can't we do that? It's really also eye-opening as far as, like, the ridiculous laws that we have here relating to, like, death and burial here in the United States. It's just, don't even get me started. The country of freedom, but we have so many restrictions on us, it's kind of insane. Especially with something as primal and natural as death and burial, and what do we do with our loved ones when they die? Like, that should be left to the family. There shouldn't be so many laws and regulations. It's kind of ridiculous. Anyway, these books are awesome, and I hope she writes another one. definitely go check them out. And I've definitely talked long enough. So let me know in the comments too if you've read these books and what your thoughts are. And yeah, talk to all you guys later. Bye.